Hey friends, welcome to the Kids Ministry Circle podcast. Kids Ministry Circle is a community for kids ministry leaders to be encouraged and equipped to love and serve the local church. I'm your host, Lauren Jackson, and this week's episode is with some of my new friends, and I loved this episode. Our guests are Valerie and Virginia, and they are some of the best of friends, but also they have such a sweet mentoring relationship. You'll hear how they met in school doing their doctorate program, and you'll hear how their mentoring and friendship relationship formed organically, but also with a touch of intentionality. And I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. We talk about how important it is to be in a mentoring relationship. And sometimes there are seasons where that is super important. And then sometimes there's seasons where it's harder to find a mentor. And what do we look for in mentors? How do we go about asking for a mentor? And what happens if they say no? So we cover a lot of questions about mentoring in ministry. This is a perfect episode for those of you who want to become a mentor to a younger leader or someone who is coming up behind you, or maybe those of us who are looking for a mentor and wanting to be a mentee. Before we jump into today's conversation, I want to share about something coming to a city near you this fall. In 2023, you're asking new questions about what it means to lead your ministry. Like, what do we measure beyond attendance? How do we know if we're leading our ministries well? And are we handing the next generation a lasting, authentic kind of faith? These are the questions we're all asking because it seems like people aren't coming back to our buildings like they used to. And if they are, it still doesn't guarantee we're handing them a brighter faith and future. So, what if we could reframe for ourselves and our entire team what success looks like in 2023? This fall, Orange is bringing you a one-day of live ministry training to a city near you so that you and your entire team can learn together. You'll learn what's new in culture, what's next developmentally for the kids and teenagers in your church, and you'll show your team what it looks like to keep faith alive. Orange Tour is coming to a city near you so you can bring your staff, volunteers, parents, any leader who cares about the faith and future of the next generation to a one-day event guaranteed to spark ideas, collaboration, and innovation in your approach to ministry. For every ministry leader and ministry team looking to build a brighter future, a stronger team, a clear strategy for the year ahead. It's a one-day packed with practical training, and it only comes around once a year. To find a location near you, go to orangetour.org. When you register, use code KidsMinistryCircle OT23 at checkout to get 10% off the ticket price. That's orangetour.org and use code KidsMinistryCircle OT23. We'll see you there. So wherever you are, you will love this conversation with Virginia and Valerie. Val and Virginia, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you guys are here.
Thank you so much. We're excited to be here.
Thank you for having us.
No problem. I'm so excited. I feel like this is like such a fun collaboration because we'll talk about the podcast that you guys host. And so now you're here and I'm like, it's like one big like mega podcast with just some really fun people, in my opinion. And so why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, talking about where you are serving now, how you got started in the world of kids ministry. So Val, I'm going to have you go first.
Okay. All right. Well, I have a long and very complicated answer for that. And I always say that because of my age, I have a lot of different experiences, but I have been serving vocationally in children's ministry, Christian education for 29 years now, and actually started out as a teacher in a Christian school and eventually became principal there. And so served for a lot of years in Christian education. But the whole time that I was doing that, I was also serving as the volunteer children's ministry at our church. And so both of those positions have always kind of come hand in hand for me, where I've served both in Christian education and in church ministry. Then I served for the Tennessee Baptist Convention as an education specialist for several years and did training and teaching across the state of Tennessee. And along with that, I also did some writing for different curriculum companies for children's ministry and served as a children's minister for several years. But actually, for the last couple of years, we moved back to our hometown to help take care of my mom, who is turning 93 next week.
Wow.
And so, my intention when we moved was that I was going to kind of get settled here and then look for a position in children's ministry. But I think the Lord just the last couple of years has said, right now, family needs to be your focus. My brother's been very ill, and my mom. And so I've just been really just serving my family for the last couple of years. But Virginia kind of gave me an opportunity to be able to still help in children's ministry in a unique way. And so we started the podcast. And so that's me.
That's awesome. I love that. Virginia, what about you?
Yeah, well, and I also say about Valerie, I always joke, like, Valerie's done everything. So if it has to do with teaching kids the Bible, Valerie's done it all.
Yep.
So, yeah, so I guess I started volunteering in children's ministry as like a teen. Went to seminary, met Valerie and our teen helper, but felt called to ministry in college. Doctoral program at Southeastern. I have served in churches in Tennessee, Missouri, and now Florida as a children's director, or as a preschool and children's director. I'm currently a preschool director over birth through kindergarten. And as Valerie mentioned, we started our podcast about a year ago, just kind of as an opportunity just to be able to try to invest into other people and just sort of be good stewards, we feel like, of the knowledge and experience and mentorship that's already been invested in us. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. That's such a good word of just being good stewards with the experiences that God has given you. I think that's so important for anybody. And I think a huge reason why I wanted to invite you on the podcast is because your relationship with each other is so unique. And I talk to leaders and just Christian people in general, how they have a deep desire to be in a mentoring relationship and be in a relationship with other believers and other ministry leaders who can walk alongside them. And I have the opportunity to have an incredible mentorship with my mentor, Nancy. And like, I met her when I was a kid in the kids ministry, and she was my kids pastor at the time. And like, we still hang out as much as we possibly can. And I'm sure you guys can relate, like, living in 2 different states, it's hard to actually see each other in person.
Oh, yeah.
But it is like, when we do get together, it's so fun. And like, I value that relationship so much. And so I would love for you to share, not me share, you're sharing here. I would love for you to share about your relationship. How did you meet? What does this look like for you guys? And now you got to do a doctorate program together. Now you're working side by side on this podcast. So kind of give us a little insight on like how this relationship came to be from meeting at a school. And now look at you guys leading a podcast together. So let us know. What's the insight?
I think God's faithfulness first has just a lot to do with it for me, because it was just a chance meeting. We both started in the EDD program at, and I think I said that wrong. I'm sorry.
You're right. You're good.
So we just met on our first day in our first seminar, and it was just a blessing because the cohort itself had a lot of different people in it that had a lot of different focus. They were not all children's ministers. As a matter of fact, we were the only 2 that were in children's ministry in our cohort. And so just to be able to have that person as women in ministry, to have just someone else that was in the group where we had a lot in common and we had the same focus for our dissertations in a way that was just unique. And so the friendship just generally started just from sort of surviving together in a program where we were kind of on our own.
Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely. And this topic and things, it's sort of interesting because even before, like going back before Valerie and I even met, like whenever I was in college, just exactly what you're talking about, wanting to seek out that sort of mentorship as a young adult. And so I went to one woman whenever I was in college and said, hey, will you mentor me? And so to her credit, she was very honest and very forthright. And she said, no, I really don't think that I'm in a place to do that right now. And I knew it wasn't about me, but I still kind of was like, I was kind of bummed out, and it kind of hurt my feelings just a little bit. Then again, after that, like when I was working on my master's degree, I kind of went to another woman in my church and I was like, hey, you know, could you mentor me? And that, like, she was a nice lady and she was very kind, but like personality wise, we just didn't like click. And so it was kind of interesting. So I kind of had these two experiences of, you know, again, desiring that and it just not really working out the way that I would have hoped. And then again, we get to our EDD cohort, our doctoral cohort, and, you know, we're these two children's ministry people who hit it off, and just, you know, recognizing Valerie's experience, and just knowing that she had a lot of wisdom that I could learn from. And then again, just like what she was saying, sort of being in the same boat and being like the two kids people in this group with like pastors and school administrators and, you know, chaplains and other people who were just in very different worlds than we were. So,
yeah, that's awesome. I love that story, Virginia, about you asking two people before you met Val and it being not a good fit. And I think that's really encouraging for leaders who are listening, who are wanting and desiring a mentoring relationship, and realizing that you may not find somebody right away.
No. And I think that was one of the reasons why, too, for me, because for me, I remember as I was going into ministry, being very young and doing my first internship at a large church, so many ministers are stretched so thin. And I know for me, the children's ministers that I worked with, they just didn't have time. And a lot of them would actually say to me, I'm sorry, I don't have time to help you learn what to do. I just need you to do it, you know. And it was really hard because, like I said, with ministry, it's just such a demanding, it's just a lot of demands to the responsibilities. And so I think that sometimes we think that there might be something wrong with us if we're not finding that person. But honestly, it really is just that sometimes people just don't have that mindset and they're so overwhelmed that they just don't see the need of it. But for me, education being such an important part of who I am, I couldn't see anything but to try to help younger leaders find their way, because I remember how hard it was when I was trying to do it on my own.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes for leaders, they're so focused on their people. Like they are shepherding and walking with the people in their church that it's hard to even think about shepherding someone who's outside of your church. And so it is true. It can be just the overwhelming nature of ministry and the busyness of ministry, but also it's a mindset piece too of like, okay, how do I look up and look out and see those leaders who are 10, 15, 20 years behind me that are going to eventually fill my spot. Right. And so I think both of those are important to think about. Hey friends, just a quick break to tell you that our fall cohort registration is live. Join kids ministry leaders in a 9-week cohort designed for you to learn and grow as a kids ministry leader. We believe that effective ministry happens together, so join the community to gain a new perspective and learn new practices on how to lead your teams, partner with parents, and communicate the gospel on Sunday mornings. You will finish the cohort feeling more confident and equipped to lead and serve right where God has you. To find out more about the cohort and all the details, you can head over to kidsministrycircle.com/fall cohort to register today. Spots will fill up, so don't wait. Jump in to the fall cohort. We cannot wait to see you there. But I would love to know, like, so you guys met in your doctorate program. Was it like are we officially mentor-mentee? Like, what did that, like, did you guys have an official conversation? Like, what did that look like? How did you kind of decide to be like, hey, we're going to be buddies? Or was it just this like general understanding between the two of you?
I feel like it happened pretty organically, just very naturally. The great thing, Virginia actually had an apartment that she lived in on campus that had an extra room. And I was coming from Tennessee for the weeks. And so it worked out like for me to be able to rent that room from her for the week that I was there, so that it gave me a place to stay that wasn't a hotel. But I also think it just gave us time as we worked on projects, as we worked on papers, as we had that extra time together just to be able to sort of chat, it kind of just became me learning so much from her, because she had just finished her master's program. She had been in Christian education in a different way than I had. So she had so much insight to give me. She would help me with papers and help me, learn how to do things. And we just had a lot in common too, with just things that we enjoyed. And so we just had a lot of fun talking. And so I think I feel like it just happened very organically.
Valerie is just one of those people that I call if there's something like tricky going on in ministry. Yeah, I agree. It was just very organic. And then even over just subsequent year or like a tough situation where it's like, okay, like here's what's going on. Here's what I'm doing. Like, is there anything I'm missing here? Like, is there anything that I should be seeing? Or like, so just, I think, we just kind of had a very organic friendship. And then again, over the years, just sort of being like, okay, like I'm in a tough spot. Like what's your insight and wisdom here? So sometimes I'll be like, even call up and be like, okay, I need some sage wisdom. Just, lay out some sage wisdom for me in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I love that it was like not like official. It's like, oh, are we starting the mentorship today? Like, we're going to make this official, like it, or like you didn't have like a mentorship, like DTR. You didn't have to define the relationship. It was just there. Like, and then I think is also encouraging too, of like, it doesn't need to be this very professional, like, oh, I'm signing on to be a mentor for this many years. I think it can be very organic and just somebody that you call. And Val, I love how you said that you learned so much from Virginia and Virginia learned so much from you. And I think that's such a sweet relationship, to not be this, oh, I'm experienced and you're not kind of a relationship. It's like, no, we're learning together. Yes. And that's like the key of the Christian life, is like, we're always learning about Jesus. We're always growing in our faith. We're always growing in our knowledge of who he is and how we can teach kids. And I think your relationship is just such a great example of learning from one another and continuing on the Christian journey. So I think that's really sweet.
Well, children's ministry is so unique in that there is really no one way for you to train to learn how to do it, because there's so many components to it. Because you have the ministry aspect. So you do have the Bible aspect, the study aspect, the theology aspect of it, but you also have administration and supervision and volunteers. And, so there's no possible way for any one person to be completely qualified to be a children's minister on all fronts. It's just not possible. And I think it's hubris for us to think that we have all the experience we need or all of the education that we need or know everything, because I think it's different situations are constantly coming and things are constantly changing. And so as children's ministers, we have to be willing to be lifelong learners. We just have to be. And so I think it's important for us to be able to have that give and take with one another, to be able to share and to say, this is what I'm struggling with, or this is what I, have found that works for us.
Yeah, and that's kind of another thought that I was, reflecting on with this is that, for just exactly what you're saying, just not thinking that, we have it all figured out. A successful mentorship relationship, just like what Valerie's saying, is being teachable. And so just like it is an area of our strength, still being open, even areas where we feel like an input from wisdom from others. So just being teachable. Yeah.
So I don't think that there is a like one size fits all philosophy for mentorship, because some people really thrive in an official mentorship relationship where it is a little bit more, you are the expert, I am the student, and you're teaching me and imparting your wisdom. And I think that's not a bad way of mentorship. I think both are great examples of what mentorship could be. But I do think there are some important characteristics that maybe differ a mentorship relationship than like just a normal friendship or just a normal like buddy or friend that you would grab coffee with or something like that. And so I would love for us to kind of chat through what are some of those characteristics that people listening should look for in a mentor or look for in I don't know, ministry partner is kind of a funny word, like funny phrase to say, but like just this connectedness of those kind of moments of like when something happens in ministry, like this is the person that I call, or this is the person that I go to with questions. And
I think in thinking someone with experience in areas where you do not have experience is important. And so sometimes, a lot of times even, that will mean if you're looking for a mentor, someone who is like social media and stuff, like I am barely acquainted or what, you know what I mean? What it is that the area that you feel like you need mentorship in. You know, cause like I think of things like, I don't know, older than you, but not necessarily, just depending on what the subject intended, you know, and the sort of people who are going to be much more familiar are probably younger than me. And so I do think having someone with experience is a part of that mentorship equation, and someone with wisdom, because sometimes, like a young person, like someone like whenever I was in my 20s, it's easy whenever you are. And especially think about this as to, in some ways, sort of unknowingly sort of pool your ignorance. Not that you're trying to or wanting to, but if you're only with your peers and, you know, you're all 24 and everybody's 24 and, you know, there's just so much that you haven't experienced and you don't know yet. And so looking for someone with that kind of experience to fill in just the gaps of things that you just haven't had an opportunity to learn yet or experience yet. So,
yeah. I think somebody realizing that, because I literally have had younger children's ministers say to me, well, you know, you're old school. So, you know, it's nice, but, you know, you've been around a long time. And so you don't really get what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I think that part of it comes from, again, a willingness to recognize that there might be areas that, you know, you could use that more sage advice from. But I also think finding somebody, one of the things that I work really hard to do, and I don't know, Virginia can say whether I do it well or not, but I try to speak truth and not sugarcoat things a lot. Like I will say, let me tell you, this is what happened when this happened, and try to be really honest, because a lot of times people will want to just be just encouraging and always be positive and always be really sunny and, oh, you can fix this. But I've tried really hard over the years to be able to say, you know, this is a tough situation and these are the possible ways this could go. I've seen it go, you know, all of these different ways. So you need to kind of prepare yourself for these possibilities. But I also really try hard to ask the questions like, okay, how are you doing spiritually now? Are you taking time to do these things? Like, I really try to ask the harder questions too, to not to challenge, but you know, just so that I'm sure that it's, because for children's ministry, burnout is such a real thing and it happens so quickly. And so I feel like, you know, part of what I try to do when I'm working with any of the children's ministers that I have the opportunity to do this with is to really just kind of say, okay, how are you and where are you and what do you need? So that, you know, so I think trying to find somebody that's just going to be honest with you no matter what, and really just not just try to hold you accountable, but also just somebody that's going to be real with you to say, yeah, this is a bad situation and this is what you need to think about, and, you know, and be comfortable doing that.
Yeah, that's so good. I even remember, I think back to my internship that I did when I was in college. I did it with my mentor, Nancy, at the church that she was at, and she let me into every single meeting, partially because she's like, you're only going to be here for the summer, and I want to make sure that you get as much knowledge as you can. But being in every single meeting allowed me to see more than just the kids ministry on a Sunday morning. It allowed me to see how the pastoral team and the senior leadership acted in a meeting and what it looked like for them to lead. And like, she did have those honest conversations with me of like, hey, this experience was hard and not easy, and this is how we handled it, and this is how we saw reconciliation in this situation. Like, all of those hard conversations really gave me such good insight when I was my own, like an own kids director, came up against my own hard situations. Right. And I do think kids ministry leaders sometimes have these like rose-colored glasses of like, oh, well, everything's great, like everything's perfect. And then they come up against a really hard situation and they're like, wait, this shouldn't be what the church is. And you're like, yes, and it is still hard and there are still hard things. And so I think that part of a mentoring relationship is so important, to just have someone who can not only be honest, but also have those hard conversations of saying, hey, are you following Jesus? Are you continuing to grow in your relationship with him? Are you keeping reading the word and praying and spending time with God as your priority? And I know, like, personally, I'm a mom of young kids. Virginia is a mom of young kids. Right. And you can get so lost in the, like, mothering phase of things. And you're just like, what am I actually doing right now? And so it's good to have someone who can, like, pull you out of just the mom world and be like, okay, you're still a follower of Jesus. You are still asked to continue in this relationship and learn and know more about who God is. And so it can be very crazy. And so we're thankful for people like you, Val, who can keep us on track.
To try so hard. Well, and Virginia and I were just talking about this actually earlier today, because I was talking about how hard it is when you are in vocational ministry to be able to separate your personal relationship with God and your own spiritual growth in your spiritual life from the work of the church, because they become so intertwined. And I know for me personally, now these last few years where I've stepped away from vocational ministry, and I've had to really spend time looking at my personal relationship with God and how much of my identity became, I'm a children's minister, I'm in ministry, and how much of my identity is I'm a child of God and I am a believer and a follower of Christ. And so it's really hard because they get very entangled. And so and because it's so overwhelming, the ministry in general, and being able to do all the things you have to do and all the responsibilities you have with family and everything else that goes along with it. You know, sometimes we have to sort of have those times where we have, you know, friends to be able to say, hey, are you taking this time? Are you protecting these things? Are you? Because honestly, you know, the church will always be asking more from you. There's never going to be a time where the church is going to say, oh, take this time and relax and don't, you know, it's going to be constant demand. So you have to be able to kind of learn that. And that comes from time. It just, that's just experience. And so.
Yeah, that's so great. Okay, so I want to kind of speak to a little bit of like practical sense and just give us like a little sneak peek of your guys' relationship. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. How often do you talk a week?
Now more often than even before because of the podcast.
You got this podcast.
Yes, yes. So I think we do end up kind of, but it's very different because a lot of our conversations now are about the podcast and what we're doing and more technical things.
Yeah. Crisis by crisis.
But I would say, now where we talk a couple of times a week, where before we started the podcast, it wasn't as often. So it wasn't necessarily like a set time that we had. It was more just when we had time to catch up, or if Virginia did have a question, or it was, hey, you know, we're getting ready to move. Can you pray? And those kinds of things too. You know, that kind. Because like I said, you know, Virginia has just been a huge encouragement to me ever since we met, just in praying for me and talking through things with me and helping me get perspective. And so, so she definitely became a person that even, you know, for me, when I was struggling with something, I would call and say, hey, help.
Yeah. No, that's good. Do you guys ever do... I'm trying to think things together. Do you ever do like a study together, or do you ever like? I'm trying to think of like what else could be in like a mentor-mentee relationship. And I mean, this is a sneak peek into what works for you guys, but also knowing that like some other mentors and mentees may do something completely different. But like, has there ever been like, oh, let's read this book together, or let's do this together? Talk about how you guys have learned side by side. other than your whole doctorate program.
I started to say, we did a lot of that in the doctoral program that was just sort of natural, where we were reading the same things, we were writing about the same things and that kind of thing. I have done that with others where I have done studies. Like I've said, this is a great book. Let's walk through this together. And I would meet somebody for coffee and we would talk about the book. But I haven't done that with Virginia. We haven't like specifically like done that particular thing. I think because we were always working through things with the doctoral program and then with the podcast, so we're kind of always kind of working together
on
with
something
that.
else.
I think.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Virginia, I would love for you to speak to, for those people who are desiring a mentoring relationship or looking for a mentor, how would you encourage them to do that? What are some steps they can take? What are some ways that they can be on the lookout for a mentor, reach out to a mentor? Just kind of give us some encouragement for those people who want this relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have another great story for that too.
Oh, yes.
So I think part of that is being intentional to put yourself either physically or digitally, if you need to do it online, in the same spaces as the sorts of people who you're looking to mentor you. So if you're wanting to be mentored by another children's ministry leader, going to children's ministry conferences, getting to know people online, like with your cohorts, so with the Kidmin Circle cohorts. And so putting yourself in opportunities to meet people is step one. And then I think step two is just talking to them, just striking up a conversation, getting to know them. Because another funny story that I have from that is this was back in January of 2020. So, obviously right before the whole world changed. At a Lifeway VBS conference, I heard probably the best presentation that I'd heard to that point on children's ministry safety and security by Dr. Faye Scott. And just after the breakout, I just went up to her and I was like, that was wonderful. I would love for you to come do this at my church. And so we exchanged information. We started talking back and forth. Of course, COVID happened. And so it was another year or two before she was able to come. But through that, I just got to know her. And now she is one of those people who I call when there's a question or something where I'm just kind of not sure what to do. Like Faye's one of those people where I'm like, okay, Faye. It's funny because at a previous church, one of the things that we did was we installed cameras in all of our classrooms and hallways everywhere. Cameras, throughout our preschool and children's spaces. Give me your thoughts in those spaces to meet the type of people who would make good mentors, and then putting yourself out there to begin a relationship with them and to get to know them. And so again, and it wasn't like the first time I talked to Faye, I walked up to her after the breakout and was like, hey, let's be best friends. Like it was like, hey, let's exchange information. I wanted her to come to our church and then, and just kind of keeping in touch.
Which
That's
is
awesome.
really funny because, again, it's a God thing because we didn't even realize, like, I didn't know that Virginia had met Faye. Faye is actually one of my editors through Lifeway for writing that I do. And so it was just really cool when we had that moment of realizing we all knew each other. And
That's the best.
So it was just neat
That's
to be
awesome.
able just to grow that relationship and to build through that relationship. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I had one of those moments when I was at the Children's Pastors Conference in January. There was, my mentor was over here, and then there was somebody from Lifeway where we both knew it. Like, it was like a circle of like, oh, you know this person? Well, I know this person. And it was like, that's the best. It makes you feel like the kids ministry world is so small.
Right.
And that's what's so fun about it. And so, Virginia, I loved kind of like this mentality of like, you can have different mentors that are experts in different things. And so I think about like my mentor personally, it's like, she's kind of my catch-all, like, you've known me since I was in the 4th grade. Like, I've babysat your girls. Like, our families are close. And, like, we just kind of, like, will say all the things. But then there's also people, like, I think about motherhood. I think about finding a mentor who has kids who are older than mine. And I think about business and podcasting and like all of those things that I'm still learning and not an expert at. I can find people who can mentor me in those specific ways. And so finding a catch-all mentor may not be the first step. Maybe it's, what do I want to be better at? Maybe it's volunteers. And there are some great people out there who are volunteer experts who you can go to and say, what would coaching look like? What would mentoring look like? Or kind of different areas of ministry. And I think that may be a great first step, instead of finding like, well, I want to find like a lifelong mentor who can just be my friend and talk about all the things. So I think that's encouraging and really helpful. So Val, I'm going to ask you, on the opposite side of things, what would be your encouragement for people like you who have been in ministry for decades and have so much wisdom to give, but maybe they feel unqualified. Maybe they feel like they don't have a lot of wisdom, or maybe they feel that tension of like, ministry has changed so much and I just don't know if what I know and what I experience is actually helpful. And kind of this tension of like, do I have enough time? How can I allocate the time to give to the next generation of leaders? And so what would you say to the people who are in your spot who have done this for years and have so much wisdom to give? What would be your encouragement to say, here's how you can put yourself out there to be a mentor?
Well, and I think in ministry there is no retirement. Like I don't feel like that there's ever a time that God says, okay, once you hit this point in your ministry, or when you hit this point in your life, then you're done.
Yeah,
I think it's a continual. It's like I said, we're lifelong learners, but I think we also have responsibilities that God's given us that carry on throughout our life. And it is really discouraging because, like I mentioned before, I kind of have run across a lot of that. Well, you're really you're too old to really understand what I'm going through, or you really don't have this. But one of the things that I'm constantly trying to remind people is that there are certain educational concepts and ministry concepts, biblical truth that is true forever and always. It's what we know to be true. And so I think that there are certain things, like maybe social media and things in the world that changes that you might not be familiar with. But those basic educational concepts, building relationships with kids, knowing how to teach a biblical truth, those I think are things that last forever. And I think that we have the ability to be able to have a perspective of being able to see the big picture. Because we can look back. Because I'll say that to Virginia a lot. Where I'll say, at this time, I really didn't know what was going on. But now, when I look back, I can see how God has taken all of these pieces and placed them together. And so I think what comes with that is that wonderful opportunity that we have. Even if it just starts with praying for somebody, and encouraging them and offering to take them out for a coffee and just let them vent. Just don't say, oh, I'm going to tell you how you should do things, but literally just say, what are you struggling with right now? Because it's really hard in ministry. We don't have those people that we can really vent to because we are responsible for our families and our kids and even other staff members. We have to reserve some of our feelings and our situations. And so I think that finding that person outside of your circle that you can just meet for 30 minutes to have coffee with and just say, okay, just let it all out. Tell me what you're struggling with. Just let me know how I can pray for you. And then let it just happen organically from that. But it's just being finding those little opportunities, sending a note to somebody or finding those little ways that we can just be encouraging and letting people know we're here. And so, and for me, I've met a lot of people as I've led conferences, and especially with this opportunity that we've had with the podcast, has been just really encouraging for me because that was really what we were talking about when we decided to do it. Is that I felt like that I had all of these years that God has done so much for me that the least I could do is to try to forward that on to children's ministers that maybe do feel like they are alone or that they don't have the resources to be able to go to seminary or they don't have the training background. And so
yeah, that's awesome. I love that. All right, so the last question we always ask is if you were to talk to someone who is brand new in kids ministry, which this question is so perfect for you guys, but if you were going to talk to somebody brand new in kids ministry, what would be your words of encouragement or advice?
The first thing I always say is that God has called you to the position that you are in. Everyone's going to have an opinion about what you should be doing, what you should be focusing on, how you should be teaching, how you should be leading. And it's really easy to begin to feel unqualified or to feel like, oh, everybody has this opinion and everybody's, telling me what I need to be doing. And I think it's making sure that you spend that time with God to realize that He has given you this opportunity and this calling. No matter what your background is, no matter what training you have, no matter where you've been before, this is where He has you right now. And He can work through you no matter what is going on around you, or no matter what you know, or no matter what you've been trained. And so just to trust God in that and move forward with confidence that He has placed you in your position. This is your calling.
That's so good. What about you, Virginia?
Amen. Just being teachable, this is true of anything. You don't know what you don't know. Being very teachable as you are beginning in ministry, because whenever you're starting out in anything, so just being aware that there's going to be a lot to learn, and that some of that will come through experience, some of that will come through other people, some of that will come through resources. And so just being very teachable and allowing God to do that work in you. So,
yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks you guys for joining me on the podcast. If people are like, I want to hear more from Val and Virginia, where can they find you? Tell me what your podcast is called. I mean, I know what it's called, but I want you to tell the listeners what it's called, and so where they can find you.
All right. Well, we have a lot of different places where you can find us. We are Kidmin with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia. We have a YouTube channel that you can find. We also so that's the video of our video podcast, but we also have that stream on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on Podbean. So you can actually just listen if you would prefer to get our podcast that way. Virginia, I'll let you tell her the others.
We're on Instagram. We've got Pinterest. And then we've got a blog that we are
very slowly, but we've been working on it.
Oh, good. I know your Pinterest is very exciting. I feel like you're always pointing people to be like, if you need ideas, if you need thoughts, go over to Pinterest, which I feel like Pinterest is slightly, I don't know. I feel like sometimes it's kind of underrated because there's so many things there. And it's just use that search engine well for all the fun ideas. But I love that. So we'll link everything in the show notes so that people can find you in all the different ways. And we'll have to get your blog link so that we'll link that there. Yeah. Well, thanks you guys.
Lauren,
this was so fun.
This has been fun.
Friends, I loved my conversation today with Virginia and Valerie. It was so fun to get to know them, to get to hear their stories and hear how their paths crossed and how they're still working together to serve in their local church context, but also serve and encourage and equip the kids ministry leaders who are listening to their podcast and engaging with them online. It was such a treat to hear how valuable their mentoring relationship was and hear how they're encouraging all of us to find a way to either be a mentor or to be a mentee. Any stage of life, we can always be learning from one another and encouraging each other as we strive to live more like Jesus. If you want to learn more about where you can find Valerie and Virginia, head to the show notes. Everything is listed there, and you can listen to their podcast and check out what they're up to next. As always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.